This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, all the participants. First of all, I would like to thank Almighty for giving us chance to enhance our knowledge at this pandemic situation. I welcome you all for virtual power seminar on big data, organizing by PG Department of Computer Science and Applications in association with ICT Academy. I welcome our Secretary, Mr. Kaisar Ahmed, Principal Dr. M. Renu, and Vice Principal Dr. Arifa Bashir, who always support and encourage us in all the way. I would like to extend a warm greetings to today's chief guest and speaker, Mr. Dilip Muralidharan, Senior Technical Instructor at Splunk Chennai. Welcome you, sir. On behalf of Islamic Women's Arts and Science College, we welcome you once again. I would like to welcome Mr. Murugavel, Relationship Manager, ICT Academy, Chennai, who introduced the chief guest. Welcome you, sir. I welcome all the participants once again. Let me introduce our chief guest and speaker of today's session, Mr. Dilip Muralidharan, sir. He is a seasoned education consultant with a total of 15 years of experience in the IT industry with 10 years of experience in consulting, designing, customizing, and delivering technical training on enterprise IT software platform. Experienced in working with customers across APAC, North America, etc. His specializations are seasoned instructor for classroom training, online web-based training and e-learning development, and experienced in business development, selling and upselling education services. He has proven solutions architect for education enablement of technical and end users, a solid track record of contributing to the implementation of major business transformations initiatives directly leading to an increase in the revenue and margin. He has experience delivering technical training in a classroom, online setup and building e-learning solutions on a variety of product platforms from many companies like Oxterv, JDA, etc. And he has worked for good grip of technical aspects of Windows Unix services, Active Directory, networking, web services, databases, scripting and basic code, etc. And it's an amazing profile and great experience of Mr. Dilip Muralidharan, sir. It's our pleasure to have such a vibrant and distinguished personality as today's presenter. Once again, I welcome you, sir. And over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible? Is my voice clear? Is my audio clear? Just checking to make sure everything is okay.
Everything is okay, sir.
Okay, all right. So let's get started here. Give me 1 minute.
You want to present PPT, sir? Shall I end my screen?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Yes, sir.
All right. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the discussion on big data analytics. Before we get into the agenda for the day, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Dilip. I'm a senior technical instructor and I'm currently employed with Splunk. And I come with about 17 years of experience in the tech industry, out of which 12 is in education and consulting. So I've been pretty much an instructor and an education consultant pretty much all of my life. And I worked on several different product platforms out there. So I started off in a BPO setup, moved on to Convergys, where I did Microsoft-based product technical support. I then moved on to Trimble Navigation, where I did GPS-based fleet management support. My first big break was in Computer Associates, where I did storage and recovery management. And finally, I moved to EMC. Well, now it's called Dell EMC. And I moved on to education with Dell EMC, and I did the enterprise content division range of products with Dell EMC. And in the past 4 years, I've been with Splunk. I've been working on nothing but data science. So specifically, big data automation in the security space, and SIEM, security incident management and event management, which is what I've been doing. So today's agenda is going to be straightforward. So we're going to talk about what exactly is big data analytics, right? We're then going to talk about the use cases for big data analytics. We'll talk about what are the job opportunities in tech right now, specifically in relation to big data analytics. And we'll also talk about, we'll look at a bunch of demos actually. We'll look at some opportunities in terms of, what we can do with big data. How can we actually analyze big data? Big data platform. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at the agenda here. All right. Right. I think there is some kind of glitch where I keep getting muted again and again. I'm not sure what's wrong. Let me quickly check the audio settings here. Hopefully it's not something I did. Okay, never mind. So we're going to talk about big data, right? So before we talk about big data, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to look at the definition of what big data is, right? So let's go to Wikipedia and let's go search what exactly is big data, right? So if I go look at the Wikipedia definition of big data, what exactly does it say? Well, Wikipedia basically tells you that big data is a field that treats ways to analyze, systematically extract information, or otherwise deal with data sets that are too large or complex to be dealt with traditional data processing software. That's basically the definition for big data according to Wikipedia, right? So what exactly do we understand from this particular definition over here? Well, what we understand is that big data generally refers to data that is quite large in volume. So the question then becomes, what exactly does large in volume mean? What's the measure of a large volume of data? Well, I would presume any data that is a few hundred gigabytes in size can be described as a data that is quite large in volume. But usually speaking, what happens is that there's plenty of data sets out there that go into the terabytes and sometimes even into petabytes. If I have to give you a classic example of the kind of big data that we're talking about, we can actually talk about Boeing, right? So I presume that everybody here knows the aircraft manufacturing company, Boeing, and what exactly they do. So if you take it the big planes that Boeing manufactures, specifically the Airbus A3, the Dreamliner plane, right? So that plane, or for that matter, even the Airbus company, right? The A360 plane. These planes actually have a lot of sensors on them. So from what I know, the Airbus A360 has about 200,000 sensors across the board in the plane. And what the Airbus A360 does, it collects data about its operation continuously during the flight and non-flight periods in operation. So essentially what happens here is that all of this data is collected, and all of this data is, is vetted, and it goes into some kind of a big data lake. And it is assumed that one aircraft, like the Airbus A360, just one aircraft produces approximately about 4 terabytes of data on a monthly basis, assuming that the aircraft is flying on all days, right? So that's how much data is generated by just one aircraft. So think about this, right? If you've got a airlines company like Emirates or Etihad, for that matter, they would have a few dozen planes, and every one of these planes is going to be busy, and they're going to take off and land hundreds of times throughout the month, which essentially means that there's going to be hundreds of terabytes of data that is going to be generated, right? So this data, big data that's generated, this data can be structured or it could be unstructured data, right? So question, what exactly is structured data and what exactly is unstructured data? Can anyone answer that question? You can put your answers in the chat window. What's the difference between structured data and unstructured data? Anyone has an idea what structured data and unstructured data is? What is the difference between structured and unstructured data? Answers can go in the chat window. Structured data is processed and uniform, says Maliha, okay? So what is unstructured data? It's unprocessed and not uniform. What's an example for unstructured data? I'm still waiting for answers. What is the difference between structured data and unstructured data? Collection of uninformation and unprocessed, says Tenbury. I'm not sure what do you mean by uninformation and unprocessed. Any other answers? Any other definitions for structured data? Audio, video, analog data, example of unstructured data, says Huveda. Structured will be clear step, unstructured data is absurd. Okay, right. Well, I think Huveda has it closest of all the answers. So structured data is nothing but any data that has a schema that is associated with it. Any data with a definitive schema is structured data. Any data that does not have a definitive schema is unstructured data. Classic example of unstructured data is audio and video data, because an audio file or a video file can be completely different. It need not contain, right? It need not contain anything along the lines of, a specific schema. Whereas if you take a CSV file or if you take a database, right, then such information is basically going to be based off a schema. So in a database, you have rows and columns of data, rows and rows of data split across columns. And these rows and rows of data is going to be present in different tables, right? That's what's going to happen. So large volume is essentially one aspect of big data. So it can be structured or unstructured data. Most importantly, when we're talking about big data, we're talking about business data, right? Now, is simply being large and simply being structured or unstructured business data going to constitute big data? Well, maybe, but not necessarily. When we are talking about big data, we are essentially talking about complexity of information here. That's what we are talking about, right? The information needs to be sufficiently complex in order for you to assume that the information is some kind of big data. So that's basically going to be a classic definition of what big data is, right? So that brings us to the question, what exactly is big data analytics, right? Well, let's go back to Wikipedia here. And in Wikipedia, what we will do is we'll try and look at big data analytics here. So let's go search for big data analytics on Wikipedia. Let's see if all right. So if you actually look at the very definition in big data, in the second paragraph, we clearly get to see current usage of the term big data tends to the use of predictive analytics, user behavior analytics, or certain other advanced analytics method to extract value from data and sell them to a particular size of data set, right? What does that mean? What does that mean in layman terminologies? Well, in layman terminology, what that essentially means is this, right? What that means is that big data analytics is the field of analyzing big data, and the tools that are used to analyze big data is going to be specifically along the lines of correlations. So we look at pattern behavior, right? We do pattern analysis after we correlate the data. And we also try and come up with predictions. How exactly are we going to predict what's going to happen in the near future, right? And most importantly, big data analytics allows you to ensure that you are adherent to compliance. Compliance is a major aspect of big data analytics. All right. So what are the use cases for big data analytics? Well, there's plenty of use cases. We'll discuss some of the use cases here. These aren't the only use cases, but I think these are the most potential, these are the most prime use cases for big data, right? So automation is an important use case. Automation is essentially automating a particular task or a particular application or a particular set of activities, a related set of activities that are going to be relevant to a particular business, right? So what kind of automation is usually, implemented when it comes to big data analytics? Well, a lot of business processes can be automated. So take, for example, right? If you go to, for example, an e-commerce portal like Amazon.in or Flipkart or something like that, right? When you do any of these things, right, what happens is that once you go ahead and place an order for a particular product and make a payment, right, there is a series of automation that happens within the company. Your order is sent to the e-commerce server, which is then dispatched off to a fulfillment application. The fulfillment application is going to involve a bunch of people. They're going to involve logistics, they're going to involve finance, they're going to involve the taxation department, right? So all sorts of things here. And then the order is routed through various different channels until the point in time it is actually shipped from the company and it is delivered to your doorstep, right? So that's automation on the basis of a particular business process, right? I can also automate security as well. Think about this for a moment, right? Let's say you are in a corporate organization, and this organization essentially is This organization it has about maybe 5,000 employees, which is basically about 5,000 users, right? Now, if one of the users is infected with a malware on their computer, by the time you figure out what that malware was, and by the time you figure out what exactly is happening in the environment, that malware would have potentially infected 50 other computers, right? And that seems to be a big problem at this point in time, right? So what exactly can we do about this? Well, that's where automation comes into that's where big data comes into the place. A lot of times you will know that if you go to some websites and if you try to download a file or something like that, your local antivirus software would be able to warn you that you're potentially downloading malicious content onto your computer. Now, how does that happen? It happens because the primary factor that is driving that behavior is big data in the backend, right? So essentially, what's happening there is that your antivirus software is connecting to a centralized server, basically the cloud, and it's downloading all the recent virus and malware definitions. And when you try to download a file, that file, what the antivirus software does is it uses an algorithm to develop a hash, and that hash is basically compared with the pre-existing list of hashes that you would find in the cloud environment. And if there is a match in the hash, you then have a potential malware or a potential virus that is being downloaded, right? So immediately, right, certain actions, certain automations will kick in, and the antivirus software is able to send a notification and block the download of that particular file, right? So, and all of this is essentially powered by big data. Prediction is another very, very useful application for big data analytics. Market predictions specifically, right? I mean, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, if you were a stock trader, you'd have to physically go to the floor of the stock trading, whatever is the stock index, the stock market establishment that you're trading in, and you'd have to yell at the top of your voice with a piece of paper in your hand about the stocks that you are intending to buy or the stocks that you are intending to sell, right? And that's how stock trading used to happen. And then analysts they used to make predictions on the basis of whatever intuition that they might have depending upon the experience that they have in the market, right? Today, none of that happens. Nobody goes to the floor of the stock market and yells at the top of their voice, right? Everybody uses computers, and there are specialized algorithms which can basically do prediction. They can predict essentially what is going to happen in the market, right? So they're able to, with a certain degree of accuracy, they're able to predict, which stock is going to go up and which of the stocks are going to go down. So you're able to essentially buy those stocks that are going down so that you can sell them again, when they go up, right? So business process is another place where automation kicks into the picture, right? So a classic example for this is, your logistics company, right? So logistics company are essentially using big data to power most of their business processes. So how does that work? Well, you see, what happens with the logistics companies is that take a regular logistics company, like for example, take for example Blue Dart or FedEx, right? So if you ship a parcel using, Blue Dart or FedEx, or I mean, for that matter, even the Indian Postal Service. So every time the parcel is going to hit one of the nodes, you get an update on an online portal, or you get an update via email, or you get an update via SMS. All of this is done with big data analytics in the backend. So every time a shipment is going to reach a node, there's somebody who is auditing that shipment at that particular node. They're scanning it in with the help of a barcode or something like that. And that information is logged into the backend database. And there's a lot of big data analytics work that goes into that database, which is able to essentially, provide you with an overall context and understanding as to what's happening with that particular piece of data, right? So those are the prominent use cases for big data analytics. So I wouldn't like to talk further. Instead, what I would like to do is I am going to go ahead and I'm going to show you some of the examples where I'm going to use a piece of big data analytics software, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you a bunch of demos here. Well, I'll show you 2 different demos. That should be, good enough. And then what I'll do is I'll open up the session for question and answers before we wrap up, right? So let's go ahead and let's look at some example. Let's look at some demos. All right. So first things first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my environment right here. So, so this environment that I have at this point in time, it's simply put, it's a Splunk environment, right? Splunk is one of the world's largest big data analytics company. And the software that is being used here is the Splunk software. Now, I am using Splunk because I work for Splunk. I understand how Splunk works, and I have access to Splunk. However, you can do this pretty much with any other big data analytics software that is out there. All right. So the first demo is we're going to look at the sales of video games through an e-commerce portal, right? And that sales of video games is logged via your web application servers. So using the data that's been logged, I'm going to try and analyze the sales figures. I'm going to look at the sales figures via category. I'm going to try and look at the sales figures via location. I'm going to look at the sales figures via rate, discount. I'm going to try and build a dashboard with visualizations that actually make sense here, right? So that's basically what I am going to do. So let me go ahead and let me build, a bunch of panels here, and I'll put them into a dashboard, right? So first things first, let me show you how the data looks like. So I'm going to look at an index here. It's called web, and source type is just a classification that I am going to use. Now, the code that I'm writing is called the search processing language. So it's the Splunk search processing language, which I'm using to query the data that is present in the environment. Now, if you look at this, right, I'm looking at I'm essentially looking at this, this code here for a specific purpose, right? I'm looking at this particular piece of code to reveal the web server logs. Now, this web server logs, I can look at the raw logs here. This is how the logs are written in the server. And they basically reveal what exactly is the list of activities that happened in the environment, right? So what I am going to do here is pretty straightforward. I am just going to go ahead and I'm going to look at some sales data here, right? So I'm going to look at some sales figures, and those sales figures are going to give me some information about, the kind of sales that is happening in the environment. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to build a chart of all the sales that is happening. I have a lot of fields here. Category ID is for the product category. And then that's basically an ID for the category here. Product name is the name of the product. Product ID is the ID of the product. I have a sale price for the product, right? So I want to know how many products I've sold in the past 24 hours by product category and by price, the total amount of revenue that I've made. So how do I do that? Well, I'll just go ahead and use a chart command, chart sum of sale price over product. So there you go. I've got different products here, right? So, and then what I'm going to do is by product name. Would that work? Let me see if that works. Yeah. So I've got all the different products here, and I've got all the different, categories of the products that I've got available here, right? So I have a beautiful chart, and this chart essentially tells me what kind of sales I've had in the past, right? And this is a column chart of the different products that I have sold. Well, I could also put a pie chart as well if I wanted to, but it doesn't really work all that great. I could also use a bar chart if I wanted to, but I'm going to stick with the column chart because I think that works best, right? So, and then what I am going to do is I'm just going to rename this and then say, for example, what was the name? I'm just going to neatly format this here, and then product name, I will format this as product name, and then category ID as product. All right. So that essentially is where, things are at right now. And I can save this as a report, right? So I can say 24-hour sales by product category and name. So I'll just put the design here, the chart here, and I'll add it to a dashboard. So I'll call this the sales dashboard. And I can, go ahead and save this as a dashboard. So if I actually view this dashboard right now, look, I've got this sales dashboard right here. See that? Right? So that's a very simple example of, elaborating sales data. That's all I'm trying to do. Now, what I could also do is I could also have offline sales as well. You see, I looked at the products that have been sold online on my e-commerce web server. But what I would want to do is I would also want to look at the amount of sales that I have offline. I mean, somebody could walk into a store and they could, buy a video game from a store, right? You don't need to necessarily buy it online through an e-commerce web portal. So how do I deduce what kind of sales is happening when it is happening offline through a store? Well, I have data for that as well. I have offline sales data. So I'm going to go into my sales index. And I'm just going to look up the vendor sales. And in the past 24 hours, I've got, sales that is happening. Now, the cool thing here is that I could go ahead and I could try and I could get information about the list of countries where the product is going to be sold. Now, I am interested only in a specific set of countries. So to be fair, I have a lot of countries here. I have vendor country. If I go here, I have 100 plus countries. but I am only interested in the United States. So I want to look, I want to file a report for the sale of video games in the United States of America, right? So question, how do I do that? Well, it's not a really difficult thing to do. All that I am going to do is I'm just going to run a chart count by vendor, state, province. So this is basically a command that allows me to look at the different, you know, products that have been sold by different vendor states in different country. Now I want to restrict this only to the United States. So I'll go restricted by vendor ID. I'll say vendor ID is less than 3000, which is basically just the United States. And there you go. I've got all the 50 states here in the United States of America, right? That's all the data that I have. Now, what I am going to do is I am going to plot this in a map. So question, how do I plot this in a map? Well, I have a map command available in my software. So I'll just go ahead and use a map. So the map I'm using is called GeoUS States. That's the map I'm using, but you can, have your own set of map as well if you want to, right? So there you go. I've got latitude, longitude information. And if I put this on a map, you see I've got a beautiful map here. See that? This is the map of the sales in the United States of America. I can also format this map in different ways as well. I can change the colors of this map. I can change it to a divergent color, or maybe I can even change it to a categorical color as well. And I can save this as a report here, right? So I can say 24-hour sales in USA. I'll save it, add it to the same dashboard. I'll add it to the sales dashboard, right? And then save it. And I can go to the dashboard and I can take a look at that particular dashboard here as well. See, now I've got the dashboard. I can even edit this and I can put this across each other so that the dashboard makes sense. So I can just put the United States in the most relevant place here and then save it. See? So that's how I get to a dashboard. Now, I've got the online sales and I've got the offline sales. What if I want to compare, right? What if I want to compare the online sales versus the offline sales? Can I do that? Yes, I can. Remember, I already have the data that I need for comparing the sales here. In fact, let me show you. If I go here, all right. So this is the offline sales, and then this right here is the online sales. Now, what I want to do is I want to combine these two, and I want to compare them, right? So I don't want to do anything with just one piece of data, but I want to compare this. So what I'll do is I'll make sure that I get the successful sales here, right? So I'll say action equals to purchase and status equals to 200. And I'm going to parenthesize this like I would do in any programming language, right? And then I'm going to run the search. That gives me the sales figures for both the online sales as well as the offline sales, right? Now, it's only a matter of time before I go ahead and compare this. How do I compare this? Well, I'm going to run a time chart and then say span this every 1 hour, then count by source type. So now I've got a time-based value. I'll rename this, rename access combined as online sales, and then vendor sales as so if I go to the visualization here, I can choose a line chart. Now the line chart is good, but if I want to compare them both together, an area chart would be better. So if I use the area chart, see, this is what I get. Now the cool thing about this is that I can also do a chart overlay. I can go to format and I can overlay, for example, I can overlay the vendor sales over online sales and see this is my vendor sales and this is my online sales. So I can go and save this and I can say online sales versus vendor sales last 24 hours. Save it and I'll add it to a dashboard. Save it. And look, my dashboard is now complete. So I have the sales dashboard where I've got some online sales data, I've got some offline sales data, and I've also got the comparison between the online sales and the offline sales, right? So that's a simple sales dashboard right there that I've just built, right? So what have we looked at so far? We've looked at, some online sales data, and we've basically looked at comparing some online sales values, and we've essentially looked at what exactly is going to happen if we're going to look at the if we're going to look at the data, the sales data that is present within the organization here. All right, so there's a question from Tenmuri, how to create it to the online sales and offline sales. I'm not sure if I understand your question. Are you asking where the data came from for the online sales and for the offline sales? Is that the question, Tenmuri? Well, if you're asking how the data came from a web application server. It was logged from a web application server into Splunk. So there are 3 web application servers here. I can actually show you. If I go here and if I just run one of these commands, let me go here. Look, the host clearly says www1, 2, and 3. So there are 3 web application servers. So the data actually comes from a web application server, right? So Maliha Azami asks, does big data use any other language other than SQL? Well, this is not SQL. This is SPL. This is the Splunk search processing language. This is not SQL. So big data uses a variety of languages. It's not just SQL that you can use. You can use SQL as well for big data analytics, but SQL has a lot of limitations. SQL does not really scale all that well. When the data grows into a very, very large size. That's one of the limitations of SQL Server, actually. So it would be not a great idea in the long run to use SQL for big data analytics. You might want to use some kind of a NoSQL database or some kind of a big data analytics platform like Splunk or Hadoop or Elasticsearch, something like that. Amazon Tableau. So these are all big data analytics platforms, and you might want to use one of these instead of using SQL Server. All right, so let's go ahead and let's talk about the next demo, the next use case. So the next use case we're going to look at is going to be analysis of corporate network. Now we have a lot of data from our corporate network. This data is logged from a Cisco switch, right? So the Cisco switch is going to log all this data, right? So there's a question from Sindhu. No experience needed to start online typing jobs. I'm not sure what do you mean by online typing jobs. Not sure if this is connected to our discussion. Okay, I'm going to ignore that because I'm not sure what that question is about. So, yeah, what's happening here is that we've got some Cisco routers and we've got some Cisco firewalls and switches and whatnot, right? So these routers and switches and firewalls, they send data, right? So they send data into the Splunk environment. We're going to analyze this network data to see usage patterns of our employees. And we're going to try and see, how exactly, employees are violating the corporate network, right? That's what we are going to try and see, right? So let me think about this for a moment. What kind of data do we want to use? Let me see. Okay, so let me go here and let me run a search. So I'm looking at my network index and I'm looking at the Cisco WSA Squid. If you know anything about networks, Cisco WSA Squid is nothing but Cisco log data from Cisco switches and Cisco devices. So now in this data, I have a field called usage, and this field usage essentially tells me what kind of usage that the network is subject to, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run a simple time chart, right? Right? And I'm going to get the usage data for all the different types of usage. And in the visualization, if I go to a line chart, I would get a very beautiful line chart of all the different types of usage in the corporate network in the past 24 hours, right? So I can actually save this as a report. So save this as a report, and I'll save this as network usage by type. I'll call this corporate network usage by type. And I'll add it to a dashboard. I'll create a new dashboard called corporate network monitoring last 24 hours. So I'll just go ahead and call this network usage by type. So there you go. I've saved that report and I've added it to a dashboard as well. And as you can see, I've got the different types of uses for the network here, right? So that essentially is one use case right there for the corporate network, right? So what else can I do over here? Well, what I could do is I could also try and analyze the different types of data that is being downloaded using the network. How do I do that? How do I figure out the different types of data that is being downloaded for the in the network? Well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the same search, but I'm going to say stats. I'm going to use a statistical count here by HTTP content type. Now these are all fields that are extracted from my data right here. So I've got all the different types of data over here, and I'm simply going to go ahead and say eval type if I'll go ahead and say HTTP content type like. image, and then I'll go ahead and say other. So the content type here is basically I've got other content type, graphical content type, right? Whatever type of content here. So if I go to the visualization here, I've got the different types of contents over here. So I could also go ahead and put this on a bar chart if I wanted to, right? So I could see the different types of usage over here. I could increase this to the past 7 days if I want to get slightly more diverse data if I'm interested in something like that, right? So that's essentially what I would want to see, right? So I'll then stats sum of count as total by type. Got a syntax error there. So that's the total type I have, graphic and other. I can go to the visualization and I can easily make a pie chart out of this. So I can save this as a report and I can say, actually, I'll just do this for the last 24 hours. I'm not interested in 7 days. Save that as a report. I'll say content type and I'll add it to the corporate network dashboards, call it content type, and then save it. So there you go, right? I've essentially got, what do I have here? I've got, a pie chart here, and I've got a line chart. I'll just put that against each other and save it. See? So what else can I do over here? Well, what I could do here is I could try and figure out some other things as well over here, right? I have a problem. I have a problem with, hackers, right? And hackers are continuously trying to get into my network, into my Linux server specifically. So I want to analyze, what exactly is happening there. So how do I analyze that? Well, I'm going to go to my security index, which is where my security data is. So I want to look at the Linux server data, right? Specifically the security data for Linux server. And what I will try to do is I'll try to say, fail. So I just want to look at the failed passwords or invalid passwords here, right? So essentially what I want to do is I want to know how many times a particular password has failed, right? That is essentially what I want to do. So I'm going to have to go ahead and I'm going to have to look up the password here. So the password failures, I can use a transaction command, and then I can say source IP. When I do that, notice so many different passwords, right? So many different password failures are repetitive in nature. So this is essentially going to be a problem, right? So what I could do is I could then go ahead and I could run a report out of all of this situation over here. So I could just go ahead and say, for example, what can I do here? Chart count of source IP by user. So there you go. These are the list of users where I've had a lot of password failures, right? But I'm only interested in users where the password failures have been more than, let's say, 50. So I can go ahead and say, well, I could usually use the search command here. Actually, forget that. I don't think I need to do it because the data in itself here gives me what I need. So I can say top 50. So use so there you go. I've got the top 50 users here, right? Who are essentially in the failed passwords. So I'll just report this and I'll say top 50 failed users. Save this. I'll put it to the dashboard and then I'll say top 50 failed users. All right. So now I can go take a look at my dashboard. So as you can see, I've built a nice dashboard for the monitoring of the corporate network. I'm monitoring the failed users. I'm monitoring the network usage by type. I'm also monitoring the content type as well. Similarly, for a sales use case, I've built a sales dashboard. I've looked at the different types of product category sales. I've looked at the different countries, states in the United States where the products are being sold. And I'm also, comparing and contrasting between online sales and vendor sales. Same thing with the corporate network, right? So that is the end of demo number 2. So we've come to the final session of our discussion here, which is we're going to talk about job opportunities when it comes to big data. Now, most people will start out as analysts, big data analytics, right? There's a question here from Tenmuri on chat. What means by Cisco? Well, Cisco is the world's largest networking company. So Cisco provides networking software and networking hardware, very specifically networking hardware. So if you work in an IT environment, most of the devices that you might be using for networking, like your switches and your routers and whatnot, they might mostly be Cisco devices. A majority of those devices will be Cisco devices. Question from Maliha. Why is that you use Firefox for the Splunk Enterprise and not Google? Is Google engine not safe for Splunk Enterprise? Nothing like that. Google contains all of my personal tabs and whatnot that I've got open. So I just don't want it to distract. You can use pretty much any browser for Splunk if you want to. Splunk will work in pretty much any browser. It's just that I don't want to get distracted. What if someone is going to ping me on Facebook or something like that halfway during the lecture? So I obviously don't want to be bothered. So I've just muted the Google Chrome part. Question from Divya. I just want to ask, where is the data being stored? Excellent question from Divya. The data is stored within Splunk in a Splunk index. Question from Priya. How is Hadoop related to big data? Well, Hadoop is also another big data analytics platform just like Splunk. So it's similar to Splunk in many ways. So it's just another big data analytics platform. Question from Sindhu. Anyone can do online or offline jobs without experience? I'm not sure what that question means, Sindhu. Everybody starts somewhere. I mean, everybody is a fresher at some point in time in their life. So um, there are pretty much openings out there for freshers when it comes to data analysts. Priya K, is big data secured? Well, Priya, guess what? Big data is only as secure as how securely you maintain the environment. If you don't secure your environment, it's not just big data, nothing is secured. So security is a question of subjectivity, not objectivity. So security is often about how secure an administrator is going to deploy the environment. Is big data limited to marketing field and businesses? Question from Maliha. Nope, big data is applicable to pretty much any business data out there. It's applicable to hospitality, technology, industry, pretty much manufacturing, pretty much everything out there. Question from Varsha, how to remove unwanted data? Well, you're going to have to do something called you're going to have to do something called as a data policy. You need to come up with a data policy. Your data policy needs to clearly tell you what data is wanted and what exactly is unwanted. And according to your data policy, whatever data is unwanted, it'll all need to be filtered at the source, because you don't want to bring all of that noise into your big data analytics platform. A question from Dr. Deepa C. Whether any training center to learn course? If so, well, there are plenty of training centers. I think the most widely available training as far as big data is concerned is you've got training centers for Hadoop. You've also got training centers which will teach you Python and R programming. So I think you should learn Python and R programming and also probably take Hadoop classes. Whether the certificate is valuable. Every certificate is garbage. Every certificate is useless in the IT industry, including your college degree. Even if you are an engineering graduate who put in 4 years, that engineering degree is only as useful as getting you into the job. You have a degree and that's it. Otherwise, everything else is useless. The only useful skill in the tech industry is what you can do and what you cannot do with your skill set. I don't have a computer science degree. I have a Bachelor of Commerce degree, and I didn't go to regular college. I went to distance education when I graduated from high school. But I always knew that I wanted to come into the IT industry, so I couldn't really care. And despite not having a computer science degree, I do work in one of the biggest big data analytics companies for the world right now, and I'm in a very prime lucrative position. So certificates are always useless. Do not count on any certificates or any certification. So all that matters is your skill set. If you can demonstrate to a company in the interview that you have a skill that can be applied to a particular job, there is no reason why they will not hire you. At least any decent company should be clever enough to hire you. If you have the necessary skill set, but you don't have a certificate, and if some company does not hire you, it's probably likely that that company is not worth working for in the long term, right? So focus on your skill sets. I'm not sure if creative skill sets is going to be all that helpful. Sure, creativity is always a good trait to have. But when I say skill sets, I'm purely talking about your technical skill set. I'm talking about, what exactly, uh, you can do with relation to, you know, uh, 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 a specific technology or a specific platform. Question from Tenmuri, what's the use of dashboard and big data? Well, dashboards are used to view data. As you saw, dashboards will give you a quick perspective of a very large piece of information very easily. Without dashboard, you're going to have to go look at every single log and try to make sense out of it, by doing a math in your head. Would be pretty cumbersome. So what is the storage house called from Divya? I'm not sure what do you mean. Are you talking about the actual storage mechanism that Splunk uses? Splunk uses a proprietary storage mechanism. It's called an index. So it uses an index. So that's what it uses in the backend. Why do we need Hadoop for big data analytics? Question from Sindhu. You don't necessarily need Hadoop. Hadoop is just one of the options that are available. There are a plethora of options available for you to implement big data analytics. And Hadoop is one of those options. You can use Hadoop, you can use Splunk, you can use Elasticsearch, you can use Tableau. As too many options out there, you're spoiled for choices. Right, let's talk about the job opportunities in big data, right? Expect a lot of quality work. Do not expect quantity work. The days of quantity work of repetitive data processing is gone. Most of your work is going to be catered towards niche markets. Mathematics is a very important skill set to have. Specifically, statistics and calculus are very important subjects to focus on in the field of big data. Logic and reasoning skill set is also very important. Critical thinking is very important. Question from Divya R. What is the career growth in big data? Well, your career growth is only as good as the amount of efforts that you put in, Divya. So if you join a company and if you work hard and if you're going to, you know, deliver results, you're going to see growth. There are plenty of people. There's been plenty of instances where I've joined a company and I've been trained by some senior professional, and eventually, a couple of years down the line, I've been promoted over the people who've trained me, and that's purely a matter of skill set, right? So, what is a niche market? A niche market basically means it's a very, very small and focused segment in the market. So it's not a very broad market, it's a very small and focused segment of the market. What do you mean by era? Era is basically a word that denotes a particular period of time, a long period of time. All right, so that brings us to the end of our discussion of big data analytics. So what we are going to do is we are going to open up the session for question and answers. You can either unmute and speak up to ask your questions, or you can type your questions in the chat window. A question from Murugavel. What is the first step a student should take to shine in big data? Well, you have all the tools and resources right now today. I mean, when we grew up in the 1990s, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have internet. I mean, internet was available, but internet was obscenely expensive. I remember the first time I had to access the internet in 1997 or so. I had to pay 150 rupees for 1 hour of browsing in an internet cafe. Today, you can recharge your Geo phone for 199 rupees and you can have 2 gigabytes of internet every day for free. So uh, you literally have the world in your hands. Go look up Wikipedia. Go look up YouTube videos on what big data is and what big data analytics is. Start there. Everything you need is available, and not only is it available, it's also free. It doesn't cost you money. It's on YouTube, it's on Facebook. You can go to Facebook. There are plenty of technical user groups on Facebook. You can go to websites like meetup.com where you can meet other skilled professionals who work as data analysts or data scientists in different companies, right? So you might want to go ahead and take a look at all of this and expand your knowledge. Question, which hardware configuration is most beneficial for Hadoop jobs? Question from Afreen. That's a very difficult question to answer, Afreen, because you need to know what exactly the requirement is. You need to know what the customer is going to do with big data. You can do a lot of things. I can do something as simple as I just showed you. You can do sales analytics and network analytics with big data. And the hardware configuration for that is pretty simple and straightforward. But I can do something along the lines of, let's say, I can be a company like Airbus, which is splunking, which is analyzing a lot of terabytes of data when it comes to analyzing. So that would require an expansive hardware configuration. So it depends upon what the use case is, right? Okay, any other questions?
Any questions? Participants, any questions? Sir, I think all posted their queries in the chat box itself. Yeah, the session really is an amazing and then interactive session. It went well. Participants, any other questions?
Okay, I think there are some questions here. Give me 1 minute here. I think, oops. Let's see.
Sir, I haven't doubts, sir. After watching your presentation, it may look silly, but still I want to clarify with you.
Sure.
Actually, we are naming big data, big data. What is the capacity of that big data? How much we can store at backend? How much we can access? Capacity of
there
big
is
data? How much?
I mean,
Yes, sir.
theoretically speaking, there is no limit to big data. So the limit is only defined by the environment that you are going to configure, right? So as long as your environment is configured to handle it's configured to handle the resources that are put into the environment, you'll be good to go. So there isn't a specific limit as such to big data. I mean, sure, theoretically, the limit is defined by the resources that you have in the environment. So the limit is only going to go as far as your computing resources are going to go. You can't expect to deploy a very low edge server like a PowerEdge 120, a Dell PowerEdge 120, and then expect it to process 20 terabytes of data every day. That's not going to happen. If you want to process 20 terabytes of data a day, you need a distributed computing setup which is going to contain at least 128 cores of processors with hyperthreading, and maybe a terabyte of RAM, and whatever storage space that is required on the environment. So it depends upon the resources that you have available.
Okay, thank you, sir. And then the query from R. Divya, where the data comes from.
Where the data comes from, the data can come from anywhere. It could come from servers, it could come from mobile apps, it could come from devices like your POS devices, point of sale devices. It could come from sensors. It could come from the web. So it could also come from the cloud. So there is no limitation as to where the data comes from. It could come from anywhere. There's another question here. Does big data analytics involve coding? Yeah, I'm pretty sure there is a sufficient amount of coding that is a part of the any IT computational environment, and that includes big data as well.
Shall we conclude, sir?
Yeah, sure, we can.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your excellent demonstration and a much informative presentation. Really, it's an awesome experience to learn with your practical explanation. Thank you very much once again on behalf of Islamic Women's Arts and Science College. We thank you once again. I thank all the teaching delegates and the students who joined with us. My special thanks to Mr. Muralidharan sir, who support and encourage in all the way to organize these power seminars. My sincere thanks to our Secretary, Principal and Vice Principal for their continuous support. Dear participants, the feedback link will be shared in the chat box. I request all the participants to complete the feedback form. It will be posted in the chat box. I request once again all the participants to fill the feedback form, and you will receive mail at this evening with a certificate download link. From the link, you can download your certificate. Thank you all your support. Thank you, sir. Really, it's a much informative and interactive session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm glad you liked it. Thank you.
Murugavel, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Participants, fill the feedback form. You will receive mail at this evening along with certificate download link.